Well, good morning. I hope this January Sunday is off to a good start for you. You know, being the city manager of most communities is a fairly high turnover position, although the average tenure has been increasing over the decades. In the 1960s, the average was 3.5 years, but that has increased gradually, and more recently has been about 7 years. But that's not always the case. This morning we'll talk with one who has served his city for a lot more than that. We'll meet him right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, our guest this morning is Glenn Anderson, who retired as Hancock City Manager at the end of 2018. Glenn was born in Hancock, moved around a little, but spent the major part of his working years in the city on the north side of the Portage Canal Lift Bridge. Glenn is our guest this morning. Glenn, welcome to The Ryan Report.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for having me today.
So you were born in Hancock, but really grew up in Baraga, I understand.
Yeah, that's correct. My dad was a music teacher in Lance, and my mom was a homemaker in Baraga. She grew up in Baraga. My dad grew up in Lance, so we covered Baraga and Lance pretty good, and then graduated and went off to college.
Okay, and you went to Carthage College down in the Kenosha area.
That's correct. Went into Wisconsin, just south of Milwaukee, and did that for 4 years. Went from Lake Superior to Lake Michigan.
Did you have a career in mind when you went there?
No, I thought I would be probably a business administrator, certainly not the public administration sector was not part of my thought process at that time.
Okay, and you did go and get a master's degree at Northern. Was that in public administration?
Yes, once I started working, well actually I started getting a master's at Northern in public administration. At those days it was a master's administrative services with an emphasis in public administration. Today they have an MPA program, is a very good one. So yeah, I started that, and then Baraga opened up a position as village manager, so I took that job, and so between getting my master's degree at Northern and working a couple of years in Baraga as their village manager, which was my first job, that's how I started in the business.
So you got your feet wet and decided that's something you wanted to do, I guess. Huh?
That is true. I enjoy it. It's been a great career. You know, it's a great profession. It's not for everyone. You know, it can be a tough business at times, dealing with elected officials and local officials.
And they can all change from time to time.
They change frequently, and they can be some very interesting individuals, but for the most part, almost all of the city council members and village council members that I served with and had the pleasure to serve with, and the mayors, have been very professional, very progressive, very proactive, really wanting to see their communities grow.
You know, in business, one of the things the leader has to do is get consensus, and that's kind of what a city manager has to do too, isn't it?
Largely. I mean, that's that and a good mayor. I mean, a good mayor can try to bring consensus as well. And again, most people who run for local government are genuine, and they want to serve the people and do what's right. And so I've been very blessed in that respect to have good elected officials to work for.
Okay. You left Baraga and took a job in Ontonagon, and you actually spent quite a few years there, didn't you?
Yes, you know, and, two things. One, I used to go skiing at the Porkies frequently when I lived in Baraga. I was single at the time, and so I would go almost every weekend, so I figured, well, why don't I just take the job in Ontonagon and then not have to drive as far to ski. So really skiing, downhill skiing, got me interested in Ontonagon. Of course, when I went to Ontonagon compared to Baraga, Ontonagon, you know, the White Pine Mine was still going strongly, 1,200 employees. The shipyard at the time, the EBSCO shipyard, had about 450 employees. The paper mill was about 300. You know, it was a booming town at that time compared to Baraga. And it was an exciting run. I was there for 13 years, as you mentioned. Of course, we saw White Pine, remember, they became an ESOP. They went out of business, reopened as an ESOP, and then, of course, ultimately closed. The shipyard came out of bankruptcy, and then WEDTech purchased them, and that was an interesting run. And of course that ultimately closed, and of course unfortunately the mill closed much after I left Ontonagon, but at the time it was owned by Champion International, and it became Smurfit Stone, and of course they closed it, and then of course the building where the mill was is gone now. So it's, but at the time Ontonagon was a very interesting place to be.
It's an interesting community in the sense that for most of the traveling public, you don't go through Ontonagon. You have to go to Ontonagon.
That's very true. Yes, and Ontonagon in general was a blue-collar town. People were very proud, worked hard. You know, we're in Lake Superior, had beautiful beaches. People kept their properties up very nicely. It was a great place to raise a family. I had 2 children there when we were in Ontonagon, and they at least started their elementary school process there. And so Ontonagon, I have a very soft spot in my heart for Ontonagon, and somewhat sad that, you know, all of the jobs that were there when I was served as a village manager have kind of largely gone.
Yeah. And they're kind of, I guess, the gateway to the Porkies, you might say.
Yeah, I mean, tourism is still important to them. Obviously, retirees seem to like to, you know, they still have a reasonably priced lakefront, you know, to purchase. So retirees have made up some of the economic activity in the area. And again, the gateway to the Porkies, it's still a great tourist destination. And of course, the Porkies are the jewel of the state of Michigan's state park system, and will remain, I'm sure.
How did you wind up in Hancock then? Obviously, you have a lot of history there. So.
Well, at the time, you could certainly could tell that Ontonagon was starting to decline as far as economic activity goes, especially with the shipyard and the White Pine copper mine. Hancock needed a manager at the time, and Hancock had struggled too. You know, throughout the '80s, early '90s, they changed forms of government. They went from city manager to a strong mayor form of government, and they switched back to city manager form of government, and largely lost about a decade of just economic activity because of the political infighting and all self-inflicted. So when I came to Hancock in the mid-90s, 1990s, it was very easy for me, even though they had a high rate of turnover of city managers. I mean, they were going through them every 2 or 3 years for a decade, and then they tried the mayor form of government, and that didn't quite work out for them. So coming into that environment, it was a little bit rugged maybe, but at the same time there was a lot of opportunity because a lot of economic activity still hadn't occurred yet, and there were some investors ready to proceed. So in some ways I was in the right place at the right time, but all 3 of my careers, Baraga, Ontonagon, and then Hancock, you know, that economic activity, the community development seemed to be poised at the right time, and I seem to have stumbled into the opportunities that have been afforded me.
Okay, we'll talk more about that in just a couple of minutes. We'll be back with more of our conversation just 2 minutes from now. We're talking this morning with Glenn Anderson. Glenn just retired as the city manager of Hancock. So you came there in 1996, and as you explained a moment ago, it was a good time to be there. Did you have any idea you would be there forever?
No, like you had mentioned, even though I had a little bit of tenure in Ontonagon at 13 years, I figured, you know, maybe 4 or 5 years and use that as a resume tool to go somewhere else. Although again, my family always loved the Keweenaw Peninsula, and once we got to a college town, you know, that was both Finlandia and Michigan Tech. There's so much assets that are available, whether it's arts, culture, sports, you know, intellectual. You know, the professors' kids are in the school systems. I mean, it's a fascinating place. And if one thing, I guess I would have, if I known how good a university town was to live in, I probably would have tried to get to a university town sooner than I did. Okay. But once we realized, you know, the university towns, college towns that Hancock and Houghton were, it was a place to stay.
What's the key to longevity for a city manager in your view?
Well, I somewhat kiddingly, but one is a very short-term memory. You got to roll. I got to have thick shoulders, I think, because you're never going to please everyone any of the time, you know, even though you presumably, you know, have some success. But and I think you got to be politically astute to your elected officials, because they do change. They come and go. They have different agendas. You know, they can be environmental agendas. They can be business agendas, growth agendas, environmental agendas. Everyone comes to even local government with different needs and different interests. So I think to me that was my key, is I would listen to what their interests were and try to tailor some of my work toward that direction. If you had council members who wanted to be, for example, go into recycling, then spend some assets and time going in that direction to try to make them look good, and it's good for the community as well.
And Surrounding yourself with good people must also, I assume, be part of the
No,
challenge.
that's true. My 23 years, I had 2 police chiefs, 2 DPW directors, 2 city clerks, you know, which backed me up all the time, and that was very, very good for me professionally. I had probably what 7, 8 mayors during that tenure, which is quite a few. But again, they all were progressive, you know, community-oriented. So I was very fortunate.
What's the relationship with Houghton and Hancock? Does that work out well? Is it competitive, or is it?
Well, I use the term coopetition. You know, we cooperate a lot, but we compete. Although again, certainly the last all my tenure in Houghton Hancock area, the mayors have always worked together closely. We have had at least semi-annual city council meetings for the last 20 years between both cities. You know, looking at mutual interests, economic development, as you know, we were the first in the UP to have a smart zone. We're the only smart zone out of the 20 that is technically sponsored by 2 cities. All the rest are individual, sponsored by 1 city. So we're unique in that respect. I would say for economic development, we put all of our competition aside and just promoted economic development in both cities, and that we didn't care where the businesses were located, whether they went to Houghton or Hancock. We had 2 mayors for years would talk about 2 cities but 1 community. And that was good politics for both cities. It was good politics for the state. It was good politics for state agencies. And it's still, fortunately, to this day, that is still largely the case. And again, we compete, you know, on certain things, but we cooperate more than we compete.
And one of the areas where you really did compete was that MTech Smart Zone, and that's really done marvelous things, hasn't it?
It has. I mean, when I started in Hancock, we had 1 high-tech firm in the city. Today we have 20. And I would guess in 10 years from now, just the city will have maybe 30 or 40. Yes, it brought, I mean, as you know, the whole UP in the last 20 years, innovation, entrepreneurship, economic development, Invent NMU, Smart Zone in Marquette, Smart Zone in Lake Superior and Sault Ste. Marie. You know, it's been an exciting ride because the high-tech sector is very robust. It's sometimes hidden. And many of the firms that even I deal with, you know, want low profile. Some of them do government security work. They need security clearances. They're not out necessarily, you know, wanting a lot of publicity. But it's been a great sector to work in. And you know, you look at Upper Michigan. I mean, we got 3 state universities. You know, 2 community colleges. We have Native American community colleges. I mean, education is still the forefront, I think, of Upper Michigan and the reasons for its success.
And having Michigan Tech in particular has to really help that smart zone.
Very much so, and of course they do some, you know, world-class research in many sectors, whether it's metallurgy, nanotechnology, software, computers, automotive, weight reduction, you know, for vehicles, military research. Infrared research, satellite research. Yeah, it's been it's remarkable what they do.
We'll talk some more in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Our guest this morning is recently retired Hancock City Manager Glenn Anderson. You were talking about the councils changing and the mayors changing. One of your council members is now going to Lansing. He should be able to bring a good understanding of local government problems with him, I would think.
Yes, Greg Markinen served with distinction on the Hancock City Council, and he will bring a strong understanding of local government. And of course, he also is a teacher, K-12 teacher, history teacher in Baraga. Worked at the Intermediate School District in Hancock as a teacher as well during his career. So. Yeah, I think he'll be a very friendly person for local government. He certainly understands the issues of the Upper Peninsula, and I'm looking forward to working with him as he serves at the State House.
Hancock is home to Finlandia University, and it really has a strong culture of Finland throughout the community, doesn't it?
Very much so. I mean, Hancock is still, to this day, probably about 40% of the people that live in the city have Finnish roots or Finnish ancestry, as does most of the UP, actually. But And we are the archive center, the heritage center. You know, the Finnish American Heritage Center is one of only 2 archival areas in the country for historic artifacts and history of the Finnish immigration to the U.S. They play a vital role in that. Researchers are coming in and out from all over the world, really, to study some of those archive materials. And it's been very nice to see that culture. You know, we celebrate, we'll be celebrating Heikenpäivä at the end of this month. We have a very strong Finnish theme committee. We have a strong sister city relationship with a city in Finland as well. And as you know, as part of being a city manager, I've been on 3 trips to Finland for the sister city. And then we've had, at least 1 president, 2 prime ministers, a couple ambassadors, a couple council generals come to Hancock. So where do you get a job where presidents come to visit you? Right. Usually usually you don't even get a chance to visit them even in their countries. But that's been a great part of this job.
What are you going to miss most about being a city manager in Hancock?
The people, dealing on a day-to-day basis. I mean, you're not in the business unless you like people. I always had an open door policy my entire career. The door was never shut unless a client or a customer wanted it shut. I would always take phone calls whenever people needed assistance. Even if I had somebody in the office, I would try to take the phone call. But dealing with people is still the best part of this job, and the diversity of people and the diversity of issues, and that I'll miss the most.
And you sought and were elected to a position on the Houghton County Board of Commissioners.
Yes.
How is it? What about that change from being a policy implementer to being a policy maker?
Well, of course, I'm looking forward to it, or I wouldn't have run. But I think that will. It's a change. It will certainly be a change for me. Obviously, county government is somewhat different than city government or village government, although somewhat related. Much bigger employment. I think there's 95 to 100 employees at the county level. Where the village was, where the city was quite a bit smaller than that. But I look forward to that. It's a challenge for me to change, and like you say, to be a little more on the political side of things, which I'm looking forward to, and yet can still be a change agent as well.
What do you want to bring to that position?
Well, I hope my personal platform was to get the county a little more involved in economic development countywide. As we talk, both cities kind of do their own things pretty well. They have the assets, they have the staff, they can hire planners if needed. Some of the smaller villages and townships in Houghton County, I think, could use some more help. Not that I have the solutions, but I think just for the county being an advocate for more economic development and being a bigger role in it, I think is good. It would be good for the county and is needed. Trail, a lot of snowmobile trails, ski trails, cross-country ski trails, hiking trails. They could be marketed better countywide, and perhaps find some additional funding to make that happen. I've always been a promoter of recycling, and even though both cities have become pretty aggressive in recycling, Hancock was the leader in that. We were recycling before any other community in Houghton County. I would hope to expand some recycling opportunities, at least most of the county initially.
Okay. Well, first of all, good luck with all those challenges.
Well, thank you, Don.
And secondly,
I'll need that.
Secondly, congratulations on having a very successful career in Hancock. And it was nice being able to share this conversation with you this morning.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll be back with some other thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. You know, as promised last Sunday, this week I'm continuing my rant against what today so often passes for personal customer service. I should tell you at the outset, not everyone gets worked up the way I do, but, you know, I kind of remember how things used to be. So last week I talked about the letter addressed to Dear Valued Customer. You know, if I'm such a valued customer, don't you know my name? This week there could be a lot of choices, but let me tell you about something else that perturbs me to no end. And that would be talking to the telephone robot. I've had the experience many times, and it happened again the other day. This involved a national company that provides a regular service for me, and I was having a problem. So I naively called the number they tell you to call, thinking I would get to talk to someone at that company. But there it was, that recorded answering message. Now first they want to get you to the right department, so you have to listen while they run through all the options and then punch in the right number. So far it's all pretty basic stuff. But when I get to the right department, I'm now talking to a new robot. People who are patient with such things probably don't have a problem with any of this. But I'm not that guy. The first question the robot asks is, tell me in your own words what kind of problem you're having. So I try to do that, and she responds, I don't quite understand. Did you mean? And then she takes a guess at what she thinks I was trying to say. I say, no, that's not what I meant. So she comes back with, let's try again. Tell me about your problem. So I do, and we go through the same exercise we went through a moment ago. She doesn't know what I said, and her attempt to guess is incorrect. Let's try it once more, she says. Help me understand what your problem is. And I said, I know what my problem is. My problem is you. We're not getting anywhere, and I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to a real person. And she said, I don't understand. So I hung up, wishing I had the old-style phone so I could have slammed down the receiver. I eventually called back and did something, I don't know exactly what, but it got me to a real person, and the problem was solved fairly quickly. I understand why companies use these methods when they're dealing with millions of customers and hundreds of calls, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. I'm afraid I still remember the days when, if you had a problem with a business, you could stop at their office downtown and deal with a real person face to face. Yes, those were the days. Back in a minute. We're about to wrap things up for this morning. The Today Show is ready to roll. Keep the TV6 website, uppermichigansource.com, in mind if you want to see this or any previous episodes of our show. Today's show will be available starting tomorrow afternoon. Thanks to Glenn Anderson for joining us this morning to share some memories of his service as Hancock's long-serving city manager. And thank you for joining us. Let's plan to get together again next Sunday morning.